I want you to just, for a second, imagine a specific moment. It's August 4th, 1922.
Okay.
We're looking down on the entire continent of North America. It's 6:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then silence.
What kind of silence? I mean, that's a big concept.
I mean, a complete mechanical silence for 1 minute, exactly 1 minute. Every single telephone in the entire Bell system, and we're talking over 14 million of them, just stopped working.
14 million.
Wow. Can you even wrap your head around the logistics of that? I mean, picture all those switchboard operators in those, hot, stuffy exchange rooms. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, on cue, they all just start pulling the plugs. Thousands of them, calls in the middle of being connected just cut off. The entire hum of the network just goes dead.
That is incredibly dramatic.
Right.
And frankly, something you couldn't even do today if you tried. The system is too decentralized.
You couldn't. It was a tribute, a massive continent-wide tribute.
Yeah.
Because 2 days earlier, the man who had basically broken what was called the inhuman silence of distance,
Alexander Graham Bell,
he had died. And so to honor him, the company he created decided to return the world just for 60 seconds to the state it was in before he came along.
It's such a powerful image, isn't it? It perfectly frames the sheer scale of the change he brought about. I mean, before him, if you weren't physically in the room with the person, their voice was gone.
Right.
And after him, the human voice became global, portable.
But here's the thing about that tribute. As powerful as it is, it really reinforces this one idea that Bell was just the telephone guy.
Which is, the standard textbook definition. He's the guy in the test. Bell equals telephone.
Exactly. But today, we are going to completely dismantle that. We're going to do a deep dive into the entire life of Alexander Graham Bell. And what I found, and I think you did too, is that the telephone, it wasn't even his favorite invention.
Oh, not even close. He actually came to resent it. He called it an intrusion on his real work.
It's incredible. We are talking about a man who genuinely tried to teach dogs to speak.
And not in a metaphorical way. Like mechanically.
A man who built these enormous, beautiful kites designed to carry people into the air. A man who raced hydrofoil boats that set world speed records. And who, in a moment of national crisis, frantically tried to save a dying U.S. president with a homemade metal detector.
And we absolutely have to get into the more complex side of him, too, because you can't do an honest deep dive on Bell without talking about his very controversial views on genetics and his incredibly complicated and, to many, damaging relationship with the deaf community.
Absolutely. So we're going to look at the whole man, someone who is just fundamentally obsessed with speech, with sound, and with overcoming the physical limits of the human body through mechanics.
It's a life that is so much louder and, frankly, weirder than people realize.
So let's go back, way back to the beginning, because Bell didn't just stumble into the world of sound and acoustics. It was, and I mean this literally, the family business.
Oh, it was in his DNA. He was born March 3rd, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. And if you just look at the men in his family, the pattern is, well, it's immediate.
His grandfather was something of a character, right?
A huge character. Alexander Bell I. He was a Shakespearean actor who became an elocution professor. His whole thing was fixing stammers and lisps. He was all about projection and enunciation. The performance of the voice.
And his father, Melville Bell, he takes that same obsession and pushes it to a whole new scientific level.
Melville is the absolute key to understanding Alexander Graham Bell. Melville wasn't just some voice coach. He was the leading authority on speech mechanics in London. And in fact, most historians think that Melville Bell was the direct, real-life inspiration for Professor Henry Higgins.
From Pygmalion, from My Fair Lady.
The very same.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
Exactly that energy, that same obsessive focus on the anatomy of speech. How does the tongue hit the teeth? How does the throat restrict the air? And he funneled all of this knowledge into an invention called visible speech.
Okay, I read about this, and it just sounds like a superpower. You have to explain how this worked, because it's not just another phonetic alphabet like we use for pronunciation guides. It's something else entirely.
No, it's way more technical.
Yeah.
So think about our alphabet. The letter B is just an abstract symbol. It doesn't tell your mouth how to make the sound.
You just have to know.
You just have to know. Melville's system was more like a schematic, a blueprint.
A blueprint for your face?
Exactly. Yeah. The symbol itself was a little drawing that depicted the physical position of your throat, your tongue, and your lips. So if you saw a symbol with a certain curve, it meant press the back of your tongue against your soft palate. Another symbol might mean close your glottis and push air through your nose.
So wait a minute. If I learned this system, I could theoretically pronounce a word in a language I've never even heard before.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where young Alexander, his family, called him Alec. This is where he showed he was a prodigy. Melville would host these little demonstrations. He'd invite university professors over, send Alec out of the room, and he'd have the professors say a word in, like Sanskrit or Gaelic. Melville would write it down using his visible speech symbols.
And Alec comes back in.
He walks back in, a kid, looks at these weird squiggles on a piece of paper that he's never seen before, and just reads them aloud.
And
the professors would be floored because he was pronouncing Sanskrit perfectly without knowing a single word of it. He was just following the mechanical instructions for his mouth.
that is just wild. But for his father, this wasn't just a party trick to impress academics. What was the ultimate goal here?
The goal was to help deaf people speak. Melville had this deep conviction that if a deaf person could see the mechanics of a sound, they could learn to reproduce it accurately, even without ever hearing it.
And this wasn't just some abstract academic pursuit for the bells. It was deeply personal.
Very personal. Alec's mother, Liza Grace Siemens, was hard of hearing. And as she got older, she became profoundly deaf. She had to use one of those long, trumpet-like ear tubes to follow conversations.
And her son didn't like the tube, did he?
No, he felt it was impersonal. He wanted a more direct connection. And he figured out this really fascinating and intimate technique. He realized that low resonant tones carry vibrations very well through solid objects.
Okay.
So he would lean in very close to her, place his mouth directly against her forehead, and speak in a deep, booming voice.
Against her forehead.
Yes. The bone conduction would carry the vibration of his words from his skull through hers directly to her inner ear, and she could hear him that way.
That is such a powerful image, a son literally resonating his voice through his mother's skull so she can understand him.
It completely shaped his worldview. It taught him, on a visceral level, that sound is just vibration. It's physics. And if it's physics, it can be manipulated, it can be transmitted. He also learned the two-handed manual finger alphabet to silently translate dinner party conversations for her. He was her bridge to the hearing world.
So you've got this kid who is just steeped in the science of sound from birth. And he starts inventing things really, really early. But some of these stories, I mean, the wheat husker, is that a real thing?
The wheat husker is absolutely real. He was 12 years old. He's at a friend's flour mill, and he gets frustrated, as, 12-year-olds do, at how slow and laborious it was to remove the husks from the wheat grain.
So he just builds a machine.
He goes home and tinkers and comes back with this device. It was a set of rotating paddles with nail brushes attached to them.
Nail brushes, like for cleaning your fingernails.
The very same. He rigged it up so the stiff bristles on the brushes would scour the husks off the grain as the paddles turned. And the amazing part is, the mill owner actually installed it and used it for years. It worked.
Okay, that's genuinely impressive for a kid. But the talking dog story, this is where I start to question things a little bit.
Well, this is that Professor Higgins influence coming out again. Bell had seen one of those mechanical automatons that could simulate a human voice, and he thought, well, why build a machine? I could do that with a living organism.
So he grabs the family dog.
They're a little Skye Terrier.
And he decides he's going to teach it to speak English.
Not by teaching it, by mechanically forcing it. He would physically reach into the dog's mouth. He'd manipulate its vocal cords and lips with his hands while the dog was growling.
That poor dog.
The accounts say the dog was surprisingly patient about it all. Bell would shape the growl. And he figured out that if he moved the lips and jaw just so, he could make the growl sound something like, "How are you, Grandmama?"
How are you, Grandma?
It was probably more of a garbled, "Ow, ooga mama," but for Bell, it was a proof of concept. Speech is just a machine. You don't need a human soul to make it. You just need the right bellows and valves and flaps.
He even built a robot head with his brother, right?
He did. He and his brother Melville built a full automaton skull. They used bellows for lungs and stretched rubber for the throat and lips. They could get it to cry out, "Mama!" so realistically that the neighbors actually thought they were mistreating a baby in the house.
It sounds like this wonderfully eccentric, brilliant childhood, but then everything just crashes.
It does. And this is where we enter a much darker chapter. Part 2. Tragedy and relocation. Because while the Bells are in Edinburgh and London playing with sound and automatons, the White Plague is just sweeping through Europe.
Tuberculosis.
TB. It was the leading cause of death, especially in crowded cities. And it came for the Bell brothers. First, his younger brother Edward dies. Then his older brother Melville, the one he built the automaton head with, he dies too.
And how quickly did this happen?
Within 3 years of each other, Bell is just watching his brothers waste away. And you have to remember, Bell himself was not a healthy person. He was tall, thin, pale, suffered from terrible headaches. He very likely had contracted a non-fatal case of TD himself.
His parents must have been in a state of absolute terror. They've already lost 2 sons. They only have 1 left.
It was sheer panic. His father, Melville, just decides they have to flee. They become convinced that the smoggy, damp air of Britain is killing their family and that the healthier climate of the New World is the only chance to save their last son.
So they just pack up everything, their lives, their careers, and move to Canada.
Brantford, Ontario. In 1870, they buy this property that's now known as the Bell Homestead. And they essentially put Alexander on a strict regimen of rest, good food, and fresh air.
And it actually worked.
Surprisingly, yes. The clean Canadian air, or maybe just escaping the city, it did the trick. He regained his health, his strength, and by 1871, he's recovered. And he's bored. He's ready to get back to the family business.
But he doesn't go back to inventing right away. He moves to Boston to become a teacher.
This is such a crucial pivot in his life story. He moves to Boston, Massachusetts to take a job at the Boston School for Deaf Mutes, which later became the Horace Mann School. And he's there to teach his father's visible speech system.
I think this is a really important point for you, listening, to really grasp. If you met Alexander Graham Bell in, say, 1872, and you asked him, what do you do for a living? What would he say?
He would say, I am a teacher of the deaf. Full stop. That was his profession, his passion, his identity. The invention stuff was just a hobby he tinkered with at night. His career was education.
And it's through this teaching that he meets 2 very specific people who will completely alter the trajectory of his entire life.
Absolutely. He starts taking on private students. One of them is a 6-year-old boy named George Sanders, who was born deaf. George's father, Thomas Sanders, is a very wealthy leather merchant. He's so impressed with the progress his son is making that he offers to financially support Bell's work.
So that's backer number 1. And the second student
Is Mabel Hubbard.
Hey, Mabel.
Mabel is. She's really the pivot point of history here. She was the daughter of Gardner Green Hubbard, an extremely powerful and influential patent lawyer in Boston. Mabel had lost her hearing completely to scarlet fever when she was 5 years old. She becomes Bell's student. She's brilliant. She's 10 years younger than him. And eventually she becomes the great love of his life.
And her father, Gardner Hubbard, he becomes the bank.
He becomes the bank, and maybe more importantly, the taskmaster. But here's the big twist. Hubbard had zero interest in funding a telephone.
He was paying Bell to invent something completely different.
Correct. Which leads us right into part 3. The invention of the telephone. Hubbard and Sanders, they formed a partnership. They were funding Bell to create something called a harmonic telegraph.
Okay, we need to stop and really break this down, because harmonic telegraph sounds like some kind of musical instrument. What was the actual business problem they were trying to solve?
So think of the telegraph system in the 1870s as the early internet. It was the backbone of business communication. But the bandwidth was awful. You had one wire, and you could only send one message at a time. Click, click, dash. Until that Morse code message was completely finished, the line was totally blocked.
And the entire network was controlled by one company, Western Union.
The great monopoly. And it was expensive. Gardner Hubbard hated Western Union. He was obsessed with finding a way to break their monopoly. He wanted a technology that could send multiple messages over the same wire at the same time.
So how would harmonics solve that?
It's based on this really cool principle of physics called sympathetic vibration. You know, if you have a piano and you hold down the sustain pedal and you sing a perfect middle C note at the strings.
Right, only the middle C string will start to vibrate.
Exactly. So Bell's idea was, what if I send an electrical signal that's vibrating at the frequency of middle C? And at the other end of the wire, I have a little metal reed that's tuned to only vibrate when it receives that middle C frequency. Then I could send another signal on the same wire at the frequency of high C to a receiver tuned only to high C.
So you could stack different messages on top of each other, almost like different radio stations on the same airwaves.
Precisely. That was the Holy Grail. That is what Hubbard was paying him for. Not a talking machine, but a way to send 6, maybe 8 Morse code messages at once.
But Bell, being Bell, had this other crazier idea simmering in the back of his mind.
He was easily distracted from the main task. He started thinking, well, wait a second. If I can make an electrical current vary to match a simple musical pitch, maybe I can make it vary to match the incredibly complex waveform of a human voice.
He called it the electric speaking telegraph in his notes.
Yes. But Hubbard found out he was working on it and got furious. He told him to stop wasting time on the speaking toy and finish the paying job, the telegraph.
Yeah.
So Bell was stuck. He was the idea man, but his skills as a machinist were limited. He needed help.
Enter Thomas Watson.
The one and only. And they were such a classic odd couple. Bell was this, refined, eloquent professor who played the piano and dreamed big ideas. Watson was a hands-on, no-nonsense electrical shop guy who could actually build things, but they just clicked.
So let's go to that famous moment, June 1875. The aha moment in the attic workshop. What actually happened?
So they're working late. It's hot. They're frustrated. The harmonic telegraph isn't working right. Watson is in one room with the transmitting devices, and Bell is in the other with the receivers. One of the metal reeds on Watson's transmitter gets stuck.
Stuck how?
It's jammed against its contact point. So Watson, trying to free it up, just gives it a good pluck. Twang.
And Bell hears it on his end.
Bell hears it. But, and this is the crucial part, he doesn't just hear a click or a beep like a normal telegraph would make. He hears the sound of the pluck. He hears the timbre, the overtones, the richness of the sound.
Why is that so significant? What was happening electrically?
A normal telegraph works by making and breaking a circuit. It's a binary signal. Current is on or current is off, a 1 or a 0. But this was different. The vibrating steel reed, because it was next to a magnet, it induced a tiny, fluctuating electrical current in the wire.
The undulating current.
That's the famous phrase from his notebook. He realizes in that instant, I don't need to make and break the circuit. I need to make the electrical current undulate, to wave, in the exact same shape as the sound waves in the air.
So they essentially drop the telegraph project right then and there.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
To Hubbard's annoyance. They start obsessively building devices with diaphragms, trying to mimic the structure of the human eardrum.
Which brings us finally to March 10th, 1876, the moment.
The moment.
Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you.
The very first intelligible sentence ever transmitted by electricity.
Okay, but I have to ask about the story everyone learns in school. The story about the battery acid, that he only shouted because he spilled acid on his pants. Is that true?
It's one of those historical debates. The popular story is that they were testing a new type of transmitter, a liquid one, and we need to talk about why that's so controversial in a second. And Bell accidentally knocked over the cup of acidulated water. He shouts in pain or surprise, and Watson, in the other room, hears it clearly on the receiver and comes running in. It makes for a great story. An accidental cry for help being the first words.
So what's the argument against it?
Well, Watson's own journals from that exact time don't mention the acid spill at all. It's only years later, when he's giving lectures and writing his memoirs, that the story appears. His own granddaughter later suggested he might have, embellished it a bit to make it more dramatic for the audience. But honestly, whether it was a cry of pain or a planned test, the fact is the device worked.
Okay, so the device works. They have done it. But this is where the story shifts from being an invention story to a full-blown legal thriller. Because Bell was not the only person working on this.
Not by a long shot. This is the great patent race. And it is, without a doubt, one of the most scrutinized and contested events in the history of technology.
So introduce the main rival.
Elisha Gray, a very well-respected professional inventor from Chicago. He was backed by the giant Western Union. And he was also working on a harmonic telegraph. And it also, independently, stumbled onto the idea of transmitting the voice.
And it all comes down to one single day, Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1876.
The day everything happened. It's just unbelievable timing.
Bell's lawyers go to the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C.
Yes. Bell's lawyer, Marcellus Bailey, files the application for the patent on the telephone. It's recorded in the logbook as the 5th entry of that day.
And Gray.
Gray's lawyer arrives a few hours later that same morning. He files something called a caveat. It's recorded as the 39th entry of the day.
Hang on, what is a caveat? Is that different from a full patent application?
Yes, and this is absolutely crucial to the whole controversy. A caveat was like a notice of intent. It basically said to the patent office, hey, I have this amazing idea. I'm working on the prototype. Hold my spot in line for 3 months while I finish it. A full patent application says, I have already invented this. It works.
So Bell filed for the completed invention, whereas Gray just filed a placeholder.
Correct. But here's where it gets really murky. Gray's caveat included a very clear drawing and description of a liquid transmitter, using a needle vibrating in a cup of water to vary the electrical resistance.
Okay.
Bell's patent application, as it was originally filed that morning, described the concept of variable resistance, but it didn't include a specific design for a liquid transmitter. It seems it was added in the margin later.
That is highly suspicious.
It gets worse. Years later, we get the Zenas Fisk-Wilbur confession.
Now, this just sounds like a full-blown conspiracy theory.
It is, but it's a conspiracy theory that's part of the official court record. Wilbur was the patent examiner assigned to both applications. He was also, by his own admission, an alcoholic and deeply in debt to one of Bell's lawyers.
Oh, boy.
Years later, Wilbur signed a sworn affidavit. He claimed that Bell's lawyer paid him $100, a lot of money back then, and that he, Wilbur, illegally showed Bell Elisha Gray's caveat paperwork.
$100.
The accusation is that Bell saw Gray's design for the liquid transmitter, realized it was a better idea than his own, and then rushed back to his lab and built the very device that transmitted the "Mr. Watson, come here" message a few weeks later.
Did Bell ever admit to seeing Gray's papers?
He denied it to his dying day. He admitted he went to the patent office to ask about the potential conflict, but he swore he never saw the specifics of Gray's filing. He maintained he was already working on similar liquid-based ideas.
So who did the courts believe?
Ultimately, they believed Bell. And it wasn't just one court case, it was over 600 separate lawsuits.
600.
Everyone sued Bell. Elisha Gray sued, of course. A fascinating Italian inventor named Antonio Mucci sued, claiming he invented it years earlier. There was this rural tinkerer named Daniel Drawbaugh who claimed he invented a phone out of teacups. Everyone wanted a piece of it.
And Western Union must have been furious.
Western Union realized they had made the blunder of the century by not backing Bell, so they tried to crush him. They bought up Gray's claims, and they hired Thomas Edison to invent a superior telephone transmitter to try and get around Bell's patent. It was all-out corporate warfare.
But Bell's patent held up against all of them.
It held up, in case after case, all the way to the Supreme Court. The final ruling was that Bell was the first person to truly conceive of and patent the core method, the undulating current. It didn't matter if Gray or Edison built a better microphone later, Bell owned the fundamental principle of turning sound into a matching electrical wave.
And that single patent became the foundation of AT&T.
Mo Bell, the largest, most powerful, and longest-running monopoly in American history.
So Bell is now, at least on paper, incredibly wealthy. He's famous, but the public reception to the phone, it wasn't an instant success, was it?
Oh, not at all. Most people thought it was a curiosity, a scientific toy. Western Union famously had the chance to buy the patent outright for $100,000.
And they turned it down.
Their president supposedly said, "What use could this company make of an electrical toy?"
That has to be one of the worst business decisions in history.
It's right up there. So Bell had to become a showman. He had to go on a road show and demonstrate the thing. His big break came at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876.
Right. This is a great scene. It's boiling hot, isn't it?
It's sweltering. The judges are exhausted. It's the end of a long day. They're about to pack up and leave. Bell is stuck in this little booth in a hot, forgotten corner of the hall. Nobody's paying him any attention.
And then, completely by chance, royalty appears.
Dom Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil. It turns out he knew Bell. He'd visited Bell's school for the deaf in Boston and was impressed by his work. He sees Bell across the hall and says, "Professor Bell, what are you doing here?"
And Bell sees his chance and gives him the demonstration.
He gives the Emperor the receiver and goes to the other end of the wire. He recites a bit of Shakespeare. And the Emperor of Brazil, in front of all these jaded, tired judges, drops the receiver, jumps out of his chair, and shouts, "My God, it talks!"
That had to be the turning point.
It was everything. Suddenly, the telephone was the star of the show. Everyone had to see it. Queen Victoria herself requested a private demonstration. And once the Queen says something is most extraordinary, well, it's officially a success.
But Bell himself, he gets the Bell Telephone Company started, and then he pretty much checks out of the business side of things.
He absolutely hated it. He hated the endless lawsuits. He hated the commercialization. He felt it was all a distraction from his real work, which was inventing. He gave all but 10 of his shares in the new company to his new wife, Mabel, as a wedding gift. He basically said, "Here, you deal with the money. I'm going back to the lab."
Which brings us to what is probably the most complex and difficult part of his character. Part 5, Bell and the deaf community.
Yeah, this is the heavy part of the story.
Because on the surface, if you just look at his resume, Bell looks like a champion for the deaf. He founded organizations, he poured money into deaf education.
He was best friends with Helen Keller. She adored him. Keller dedicated her autobiography, The Story of My Life, to him. She called him the man who opened the door through which she could pass from isolation to the world.
But the modern deaf community, They do not share that view.
No. In many deaf circles, he's seen as a villain, a cultural oppressor. And to understand why, you have to understand the philosophy of oralism.
So what exactly is oralism?
Oralism is the pedagogical belief that deaf people should communicate only through spoken language and lip reading, no sign language.
But why would he be so against sign language? He used it himself with his own mother.
He did, early on. But his philosophy changed. He came to believe that sign language created a sort of cultural ghetto. He thought that if deaf people relied on sign, they would only ever socialize and marry other deaf people. They would be isolated from the mainstream hearing world. For him, the goal was assimilation at all costs.
And he took this belief to a very dark and what we would now call a very unscientific extreme.
He did. In 1883, he published this very influential paper. The title alone tells you everything. It was called Memoir upon the Formation of a Deaf Variety of the Human Race.
A deaf variety? That sounds biological, eugenic.
It was pure eugenics, which was, you have to remember, a very fashionable and mainstream idea among intellectuals at the time. He was terrified that if deaf people congregated in residential schools where they learned sign language, they would inevitably fall in love, marry each other, and produce more deaf children.
He genuinely thought they were creating a separate and, in his view, inferior subspecies.
That's exactly what he was arguing. He called it a defective variety of the human race. He proposed policies to actively discourage deaf people from marrying each other. He wanted to close residential deaf schools and ban deaf teachers from teaching deaf children.
That's just horrific.
And it had devastating, long-lasting consequences. Because of Bell's fame, prestige, and money, the American education system shifted dramatically towards oralism. This followed a big international conference in Milan in 1880 that had already voted to ban sign language from schools in Europe.
So because of him, you had generations of deaf children sitting in classrooms, sometimes having their hands literally tied behind their backs to stop them from signing, being forced to try and lip read and produce sounds they couldn't hear.
It caused immense psychological and educational trauma. The deaf community refers to this period as the Dark Ages of deaf education, and it was largely championed by the man who invented the telephone.
And the deepest irony of it all is his own wife, Mabel.
Mabel was deaf, and by all accounts, he loved her deeply. They had a very successful marriage. But he refused to learn or use sign language with her. He insisted she become an expert lip reader so she could pass in hearing society. It's this incredibly strange mix of genuine love and, I don't know, a kind of paternalistic control, a refusal to accept her deafness.
It's definitely not a simple black and white legacy. It's incredibly messy.
Deeply.
Okay, so let's pivot. Because while all this social controversy is brewing, he's still inventing like a madman. He uses the prize money from a French award to set up the Volta Laboratory in Washington, D.C. And it's here that he invents the thing he truly loved.
Part 6. The post-telephone inventions. And top of the list is the photophone.
1880. This is the one he told everyone was the greatest invention I have ever made, greater than the telephone.
He absolutely believed that. The photophone was a device for transmitting your voice on a beam of light.
Wireless communication. In 1880, how in the world did that work? How do you put a voice onto a sunbeam?
It is so clever. He used a very thin, flexible mirror. When you spoke into a mouthpiece on the back of the mirror, your sound waves made the mirror vibrate, right?
Right, like a drum skin.
Exactly. Then he'd aim a bright beam of sunlight at that vibrating mirror. As the surface of the mirror flexed and buckled, it changed the focus of the reflected light beam. It made the intensity of the light flicker in perfect sync with the sound of your voice.
Okay, so you've got a flickering light beam that's carrying the sound information. How do you hear it at the other end?
For the receiver, he used a parabolic dish to focus the light onto a special cell made of crystalline selenium.
Selenium.
Selenium is an element with a very weird and useful property. Its electrical resistance changes depending on how much light is hitting it. More light, lower resistance. Less light, higher resistance.
So the flickering light from the mirror hits the selenium,
which causes a fluctuating electrical current in a circuit. You hook that circuit up to a standard telephone receiver, and you hear the original voice.
That is, for all intents and purposes, the principle of fiber optics.
It is exactly the principle of modern fiber optics, modulating data onto a beam of light. Bell successfully sent a wireless message over 700 feet between two buildings in Washington, D.C.
So why didn't it take off? Why aren't we all using photophones?
The weather. A cloud passes in front of the sun, your call is dropped. Fog rolls in. No service.
Yeah.
Rain. Forget it. It just wasn't practical until we invented lasers, which are a reliable source of focused light and glass fibers to guide that light without interference. But Bell was 100 years ahead of his time.
Absolutely incredible, but not all of his frantic inventions were so ahead of their time. Some were just tragic failures. We have to talk about the metal detector.
The induction balance, yes.
And this is all tied up in the assassination of President James Garfield.
July 2nd, 1881. President Garfield is shot at a train station in Washington. But he doesn't die right away. The bullet is lodged somewhere in his back, and the doctors can't find it.
And back then, their method for finding it was
sticking their unsterilized fingers and probes into the open wound and just digging around, hoping to feel it. It was barbaric, and it's what introduced the infection that ultimately killed him.
So Bell hears about this national crisis and thinks, this is a physics problem, I can solve this.
He thinks, I can build a machine that will hear metal. He drops everything and works day and night in the DC summer heat. He builds this device called an induction balance, basically 2 coils of wire. When you pass it over a piece of metal, it disturbs the magnetic field and makes a humming sound in an earpiece.
And he takes it to the White House.
Can you imagine the pressure? The President of the United States is dying of sepsis. The room is hot and crowded with worried officials. Bell brings in his strange new contraption. He starts to sweep it over the president's body.
And does it work?
And starts humming. But the problem is, it's humming everywhere. The signal is erratic, confused. Bell can't figure it out. He's trying to calibrate it. The doctors are getting impatient. They think he's a charlatan. Eventually, they kick him out.
What was causing the interference? Why was it humming everywhere?
It wasn't until after Garfield died that Bell figured it out. The president was lying on a brand new, state-of-the-art invention, a mattress with metal coil springs inside.
Oh.
The machine was working perfectly. It was detecting the bed, not the bullet.
And the doctors didn't think to tell him about the mattress.
They probably didn't know it would matter, and they refused to let Bell move the dying president to a different bed to test his theory. Garfield died, but Bell's device. It was later used successfully in wars for decades to find shrapnel in wounded soldiers before the X-ray was invented.
The tragedy of being right, but the circumstances being completely wrong.
It's sort of the story of his post-telephone life.
And he had tragedies closer to home, too. His infant son, Edward.
Yes. Edward was born premature and died just a few hours after birth from respiratory failure. His little lungs couldn't inflate properly.
And Bell's response, as always, was to try and build a machine to solve the problem after the fact.
He designed and built a vacuum jacket. It was a rigid metal shell that you would seal around a person's torso. A pump would then suck the air out of the shell, creating a vacuum that would force the patient's chest to expand, pulling air into the lungs. Then the pressure would release, the chest would fall, and they'd exhale.
That is, by definition, an iron lung.
It's the direct forerunner to the iron lung. He invented it decades before the polio epidemics of the 40s and 50s made it a household device. He was trying to retroactively save his own son.
It's just heartbreaking. But then on a much lighter note of obsession, we get to the sheep.
You have to talk about the sheep.
What on earth was he doing with sheep at his summer estate in Nova Scotia?
This goes back to his obsession with heredity and eugenics. He was trying to breed a multi-nippled sheep.
Oh, sorry, a what?
He noticed that occasionally a ewe would be born with 4 or even 6 nipples instead of the usual 2. He formed a hypothesis that sheep with more nipples would be genetically predisposed to having more twins and triplets.
More nipples, more milk, more babies.
That was the theory. So he spent years meticulously managing this flock at his estate, bean brie, selectively breeding for the multi-nippled trait.
Did it even work?
Well, the flock definitely became more nipply, but they didn't really produce more twins or better wool or meat. It was another one of his fascinating, slightly bizarre dead ends.
Okay, so far we've covered sound, light, medicine, and sheep genetics. But we haven't covered the other great element he tried to conquer, the air.
Part 7. The need for speed.
Bell was an aviation pioneer. I think most people have no idea about this part of his life.
He was huge in early aviation.
Yeah.
People forget this because the Wright brothers were so secretive about their work. Bell was the opposite. He was open, collaborative, and he poured a fortune into getting humans into the sky.
But he didn't start with airplanes. He started with kites.
Unbelievably enormous tetrahedral kites.
Okay, explain the shape. Why was he so obsessed with tetrahedrons?
A tetrahedron is a pyramid with a triangular base. It's an incredibly strong and stable shape for its weight. Bell realized you could link these cells together like Lego bricks to build massive, rigid structures that were also very light. He built these kites that were like giant walls of red silk cells.
The signet.
The signet. It was made of 3,393 individual tetrahedral cells. It looked like a giant floating red honeycomb. In December of 1907, he put a man, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, inside this massive kite. A steamboat then towed it across the bay.
And did it actually fly?
It flew. It went up 168 feet and flew for 7 minutes.
How did it land?
Not well. The wind died, it crashed into the water, and poor Selfridge had to be rescued from the freezing bay. But it proved the concept that these large, rigid structures could fly.
So the next logical step is to put an engine on one. He forms the Aerial Experiment Association, the AEA.
Yes, and here is a detail that we cannot skip because it's fantastic. The AEA was funded by one person.
Had to be Mabel.
It was Mabel Bell. She sold off some of her valuable real estate and put up $20,000 of her own money, a huge sum back then. She told him, "I believe in this." She was effectively the first female venture capitalist in aviation.
That is so cool. And what did the AEA build?
They quickly moved from kites to powered biplanes. They built a series of planes culminating in the Silver Dart.
The Silver Dart is a Canadian national icon.
It is. February 23rd, 1909, Baddock Bay, Nova Scotia. The bay is frozen solid. They wheel this fragile-looking biplane out onto the ice. A young man named Douglas McCurdy is the pilot.
Yeah.
It takes off. It flies for half a mile. It was the first controlled, powered flight in Canada and the entire British Empire.
And his team invented something crucial for steering, right? Because the Wright brothers were using that clumsy wing warping system.
Right. Bell's team thought that's going to put too much stress on the wings, so they invented hinged flaps on the trailing edge of the wings that could move up and down independently.
The aileron.
The aileron, which is French for little wing. Every single airplane you fly on today uses ailerons to bank and turn. That's a direct legacy of Bell's team.
And he didn't even stop with the air. He wanted to make boats fly, too.
The hydrofoils, the HT4.
A boat that literally flies on the water.
That's the idea. He figured that water is about 800 times denser than air. So if you put small wings hydrofoils under the hull, as the boat gains speed, the lift from the water will push the entire hull out of the water.
Which means much less drag.
Almost zero drag once it's up on the foils. So in 1919, and you have to remember this guy's in his early 70s now, he builds this long cigar-shaped boat with two massive Liberty aircraft engines strapped to the back.
How fast did it go?
It went 70.86 miles per hour. That's over 114 kilometers per hour.
On water. In 1919, that must have felt like breaking the sound barrier.
It was a world water speed record that stood for over 10 years. He was just fundamentally obsessed with overcoming friction, overcoming gravity with speed and efficiency.
So that brings us to the end of his life. Part 8, Legacy and Death.
He spent his final years at Bain-Brie, his beloved estate in Nova Scotia. He was this kind of majestic, patriarchal figure by then. Big white beard, looking out at the eagles, tinkering in his labs.
And he had a hand in shaping the National Geographic Society, too.
He was its second president. And he's the one who transformed it. It was a dry, boring academic journal. He's the one who said, we need photographs. We need adventure stories. We need to make this accessible. He really created the Nat Geo we know today.
He died on August 2nd, 1922.
From complications of diabetes and anemia, he was at home with Mabel holding his hand. It was a very quiet, peaceful end to an incredibly loud and productive life.
And he was buried right there on the top of the mountain at his estate.
Just under a simple boulder. And 2 days after that, the great silence.
The silence we started this whole conversation with.
You know, there's one last prediction he made that I think is just amazing. It was around 1920, he was giving a speech, and he told the audience that he foresaw a time when a man in one part of the country may communicate by word of mouth with another in a distant place without any wires to connect them.
He literally predicted the cell phone.
He predicted the exact world we're living in right now, a world of constant untethered connection.
It's just incredible. He set out to help the deaf speak, and in the process, he ended up teaching the entire world how to talk across oceans and continents.
And he showed us that innovation is never a straight line. It's messy.
Yeah.
It's maybe spilling acid on your pants. It's failing to save a president because of a mattress. It's problematic ideas about eugenics and beautiful soaring kites. It's all of it, all wrapped up in one complicated human being.
So what's the big takeaway for you? For me, it has to be that inventor of the telephone is just It's too small a box for him. He was an explorer of the physical world.
I completely agree. He was a man who just refused to accept limitations. If distance is a limit, you build a phone. If gravity is a limit, you build an airplane. If silence is a limit, you try to teach the deaf to speak. He just kept pushing against the boundaries of what was possible.
Well, that is a lot to think about. A very noisy life indeed.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the man who connected the world, make sure to like and subscribe to History Titans. We have so many more stories about the people who, for better or worse, built the world we live in.
And maybe share this with a friend. Send him a link wirelessly. Bell would have gotten a kick out of that.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you in the next deep dive.